Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Institute of International Humanitarian Affairs webinar series. My name is Brendan Cahill. I am the Executive Director of Fordham University's Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this iteration. The Institute of International Humanitarian Affairs was founded in 2001. As a university-wide center that reports directly to the provost of Fordham University. By incorporating academic rigor and the intellectual standards of the university with the experience and expertise of aid and development agencies in the field and those practitioners, we endeavor to advance those methods and framework by which humanitarian workers operate. As such, we serve as a bridge between academia and the humanitarian sector. The Institute has undergraduate programs, a major and minor, two graduate programs, a Master of Science in Humanitarian Studies and a Master of Arts in International Humanitarian Action, professional training and individual courses such as the Mental Health and Complex Emergencies program. It also has its own exhibition space, the Refuge Gallery. It also has its own press. We host conferences, symposia, webinars, and have research areas. Today's webinar is done in partnership with Jesuit Refugee Service. JRS is an international Catholic organization with a mission to accompany, serve, and advocate on behalf of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons. Founded as a work of the Society of Jesus in 1980, JRS today works in more than 50 countries to meet the educational, health, and social needs of more than 1 million refugees. Specifically, JRS USA is based in Washington and serves forcibly displaced migrants in the United States. JRS Jordan, the JRS Refugee Committee, and the American Friends Service Committee have produced a short film called A Journey of Hope that will be screened at 1 p.m. on Sunday, April 26th, at an event sponsored by the Young Adult Ministry and Social Justice Ministry at St. Ignatius Loyola in New York, which is on 84th Street and Park Avenue. Please consider attending, and that information will be in the chat after this is done. This webinar is being filmed and will be available on our YouTube channel. Now, our panelist. I'm thrilled to welcome our panelist, Father Dan Corrou. Dan is a Jesuit priest from the USA East Province, who's currently the Regional Director of Jesuit Refugee Service, Middle East and North Africa. That incorporates Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. He has degrees from Le Moyne, Harvard, University of London, and Boston College. Before joining the Jesuits in 2007, he worked as a teacher in Micronesia and later at Fidelity Investments, Georgetown University, and College of the Holy Cross. Thrilled that Dan will be here to speak to us today, and over to you, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Brendan, and thank you to everyone there. We've had amazing graduates of your program as part of our staff here over the years that I've been here, so very grateful to you and everyone at Fordham for the investment there. So thank you, and delighted to be with you all today. Thank you. Today, the original invitation to this was focused more on a presentation that we'll be giving on our work in Jordan, which highlights the refugee-led model of the work that we're doing there and our approach to accompaniment there. I will admit that was more than a month ago when we decided that, and as you all know, the situation in our region has changed significantly in the last month, and so I've adapted. The presentation today will be much more about the reality here in Lebanon. I'm in Beirut at the moment, at the Jesuit Church in downtown Beirut. And it will be focused much more on this, the balance that we find in humanitarian work between the needs that are very real of security, of structure, of the professionalization that we need, and at the same time to live as JRS in our accompaniment as our mission, that sense of accompaniment, that sense of proximity, that we don't welcome beneficiaries or numbers or object, but we welcome our sister, our brother, our neighbor on the journey. And so to work that balance. And as I was reflecting on this balance that we navigate, I was mindful of a story. This was from many years ago when I was working in New York City at a parish at St. Francis Xavier. There had been some violence at some houses of worship in the area, and we as a parish decided to hire a security company to have a person at the door. And we had several companies come in and present. And the final company came in, and there was this guy, big, strong, strapping, clearly former military. And he started down the line. He said, "Father, what you really need is you need an armed guard. You need someone with a gun." And I said, we're not going to have anyone with a gun in the church." And he went around and he gave his pitch again, and sort of came back to what you really need is to have an armed guard. And I was tired. I was sick of the conversation at that point. And I said, "Listen, when I was in Najaf," and at that he sort of perked up and he goes, you were in Iraq?" I was like, "Yes, I've been to Iraq many times." And when I was in Najaf the first time, I was there as part of an academic conference, and with a bunch of other religious leaders from all around the region. Every morning we would get into a bus, and we had an armored convoy in the front and an armored convoy in the back. And we'd drive through town, and we would go to the Grand Mosque downtown, and we'd have our conference. We'd do the same coming back for lunch into the residence where we were. And then in the afternoons, I would get out of all my clerical garb and I'd jeans and a t-shirt, and I would walk downtown to the same mosque, and I would hang out there and I would talk to the people who were just sort of passing through, these people who were coming very often to bury their relatives. It was a major place of pilgrimage, especially around death. And it was great. I loved hanging out there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful place. And so I told him, I said, I had a wonderful time in Najaf. I was far safer when I was walking around and meeting my neighbor than I was when I was the target for an assassination attempt in an armored convoy. And I said, the only thing that I had to protect me was my relationship with the people I met, and the only thing I carried that protected me was the rosary in my pocket. Well, that shut him up, and I was happy to end that conversation. I've been reflecting on that a lot as we are looking at security for our own staff here in Lebanon. Just multiple times now, just about 300 meters just to my left here. We've had major airstrikes just in the last week. And so we have to take very seriously our staff here. We have about 200 staff in Lebanon. And they are all Lebanese. How do we make sure that they are safe when they come to work? How do we make sure that the children who come to our education programs, or the women and men who come to our MHPSS programs, or mental health programs, how do we make sure that they are safe? How do we, I'll talk a little about this, but in this same building, in this church, we have opened a shelter for migrant workers and minority refugees in Lebanon. How do we make sure that they are safe? And that we're making good, solid, serious judgments there. And I think this is the balance that we work in humanitarian work, how to both be able to take the very real responsibilities of the reality of evil in our world, and to be able to protect as much as we can against that, and still be able to, as JRS and as humanitarian workers, to never lose sight of the fact that we are not looking at objects. So we are looking at human beings that are created in the image and likeness of God, have dignity the same as us, and are yearning for the same freedom and love that all of us yearn for. So with that, I have a short presentation here. We'll walk through, as I say, some of it will be heavy on sort of the situation in Lebanon, to give some context and to understand a little bit of where we are. So I'll share my screen here. Slowly, we should get to presentation mode here. There we go. Just to give, to do the basic numbers here. At the beginning of 2026, globally, we were looking at 120 million people displaced globally, which was the record high. And I will say, just in the first few months, just because of Lebanon, a very small country, that number increased by over 1 million. So far, just in the last month, we've had it's now closer to 2,000 people, more than 1,800 who've been killed, over 6,000 who've been injured. 1.2 million people have been displaced. And I want to highlight, Lebanon is a country of 5.5, maybe 6 million people, which means that our total percentage of population displaced is well over 22%. We're already hosting still over 1 million Syrian refugees here. We have almost 500,000 Palestinian refugees and about 4 million Lebanese. As a result of this conflict that started about a month ago, 1.2 million of all of those have been displaced. And I just want to highlight how extraordinary that is and put it into numbers. If we were in the US, this is a quarter of the population to have been displaced. So just the real impact of military force throughout the world. Just to give a sense of our own team here, as I said, we have about 200 staff here in Lebanon. The original number at the very beginning of the war was much higher. Now we're at about 10 who remain displaced. Others who've moved basically in with their auntie who lives up in the mountains or their grandparents who live in a safer village. So about 10 of them are displaced, but they still come to work every day. And I think that's an extraordinary, we have lots of staff even in my own office here who they're not living in their own homes. They're now sharing a room with all of their family, living in their auntie's place, which is a much smaller place. But they're still able to show up for work, focus, concentrate, love their neighbor. And I think that's an extraordinary testament to their work. 51% of our staff report that there are strikes close to their homes. There was a big strike that got a lot of press in the US. A 15-story building was struck here maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the whole building sort of collapsed. I was upstairs on the roof of our Jesuit residence watching the thing happen. And it was horrific. You heard the cries and the screams. One of our staff lived in a building that was, the next building over. And so like the windows were shattered and dust was covering everything that they owned. So they have had to be resettled. They've moved in with family. But all of their stuff is gone. And so now they're trying to sort of make ends meet. This was a middle-class family. They had income. These were not, the poorest of the poor. 3.6% of our staff are living in areas close to direct strikes. And over 50% all are struggling with just how to handle this. And I think I want to highlight a couple things with the fact that we as JRS are very deliberate about hiring local staff. We hire some crazy Jesuits like myself and bring us in from outside. But we're very dedicated to that idea that in Syria, we hire Syrians, in Lebanon, we hire Lebanese, and in order to begin that sense of a proximity. There's a language knowledge, there's a knowledge of the culture that's shared. That's incredibly important for us. But they also, so the Lebanese who are of working age these days, their parents had lived through the Civil War. They took the trauma of that. They all lived in school, high school, or elementary school. They were here during the 2006 war, Hezbollah in Israel. They all lived through the various clashes in the last few years. And then a year and a half ago in the 2024 war. And so the psychological stress of just being exhausted by the uncertainty of this, Beirut blast that happened at the same time, the economic crisis that happened at the same time. So we're looking at the care of the caregivers, which is something that we're all very, very mindful of. But it isn't just a matter of the stories they're hearing, but it's the stories they're hearing on top of their own lived experience at the moment. And so something that we're grappling with a great deal. I do think it's important just to give a little bit of background here in terms of the war that we're looking at itself. You might have heard that in the US, there have been for the first time in many decades, negotiations or conversations between Lebanon and Israel officially. But at the end of the day, the conflict isn't between Lebanon and Israel, it's between Hezbollah and Israel. Hezbollah was formed in the 1980s when Israel occupied southern Lebanon. And it was a resistance force to push back against the Israeli occupation that was happening at that time. What I would say is that the dominant narrative of Hezbollah is that there is a fear of Israeli occupation and Israeli overreach, and that Lebanon is not strong enough itself and its own military to protect the property, the territory of Lebanon from Israeli aggression. So what I will say is that Israeli incursion, which is happening right now in the south, just 40, 60 kilometers south of us here, is only strengthening the story of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And I think it also highlights the fact that Israel has occupied parts of Lebanon from 1982 to 2000. And Israeli historians or Israeli social historians will talk about that as Israel's Vietnam, their quagmire, that period of time. None of the veterans of the Israeli Defense Force would think of that time in a positive way, that what it was to occupy southern Lebanon, the resistance that came from Hezbollah and others, was a very difficult occupation. So the history there for Israel, but certainly the history for the Lebanese, is very, very negative of that time. In terms of Hezbollah and the Lebanese armed forces, there's this the story right now, and what we're hearing certainly in the larger international news is that the request is that Hezbollah be disarmed and that the Lebanese armed forces be the only have a unique monopoly on the use of force in the country, in defense of the country, which is a definition of a nation state. You should have, the state should have a monopoly on the use of force around it in its borders. That it's actually not true for Lebanon, because Hezbollah, at least before 2024, was stronger than the Lebanese armed forces, and so that created this strong imbalance. And Hezbollah is very tied to Iran. It's not 100% Iranian. I think what I always say is that Hezbollah is to Iran as Israel is to the United States. Israel does things the United States doesn't want. The United States does things Israel doesn't want. Hezbollah does things Iran doesn't want. Iran does some things Hezbollah doesn't want. But there's still a strong relationship, one to the other. So I think that's an important, point there. And the strength of Hezbollah was because of a lot of support from Iran. When we talk about the Lebanese armed forces disarming Hezbollah, I've in conversation with friends back in the U.S., I've tried to give it and sort of to do an analogy here. I grew up in upstate New York, in a little town of Saratoga Springs, and there was always the division between upstate New York and the city. Friends who were shocked to hear that there was running water and electricity north of the Tappan Zee Bridge. There was that divide, and so there was always this. I'll say we felt an inferiority complex. We weren't Manhattan, we weren't New York, we weren't as cool as all of those folks in the big city, and so there's this division there. What would be, I think, a helpful analogy here is imagine that the National Guard for New York State was mobilized by the governor, and it said that the governor said that all of the people in upstate New York needed to be, their weapons needed to be withheld. Now, I don't know for a fact, but the National Guard in New York, I would assume, is probably more than 50% from the city. But what would happen to those folks who were from my hometown or other places in upstate New York? What would they think about having to go into their neighbors and disarm them? They would openly revolt, or they would do that very unwillingly. But then also, National Guard soldiers from other parts of the state, from downstate, they might say, well, I'm it's not my neighbor. I don't really care about that, but I care about the principle of it. It's the Second Amendment that they would argue about, or they would just that that's not the role of the state, whatever it is. So you have to imagine that the Lebanese armed forces can't just go and disarm a major force that has been. It isn't just a militia. It is a political party. It is a social welfare society. It runs hospitals and schools. It does very good work in the community. For them to go in and disarm this thing that has been, in the mind of most Lebanese, has been protecting them from Israel for the last 30 or 40 years, they would revolt. And so I think it's important for us to say that the question of disarmament is not something that is easy and can be done lightly. I think there's certainly a will in the Lebanese government right now to do that. But I think the potential outcomes are something that we have to take very seriously. I think when you hear the Lebanese sort of worst case scenarios, that the push to disarm Hezbollah would only erupt in greater civil war. That Shia would side with Hezbollah and that others would side against them, Sunni and Christian. So the fear is always of sort of a future eruption or return to civil war. And this is part of Pope John Paul would talk about Lebanon as Lebanon is itself the message. Now that's the church looking at the very best of what Lebanon is. That Lebanon is a society where multiple religions and multiple ethnicities can coexist with one another and live in harmony. And when it's working really well. Lebanon is a prosperous state. It is a place where Muslims and Christians and Druze would live next door to one another, would know one another in the market, would pray in their own respective places. Just as our office is here, all of my Druze staff were the first ones to wish me a happy Easter on WhatsApp. That we would rejoice in the other holidays for the other people. That's the mission, that's the dream, that's the message. When it doesn't work, it falls into the very worst of who we are, and we separate and we divide and we fear and we build walls and barriers and divisions. And so I think this is the potential outcome here is that the division caused by the use of force globally would sort of light the powder keg that is the possibility of a violent outcome here in Lebanon. So that's what we're very, very concerned about there. Just to sort of give a very quick overview of where we are in the question around Hezbollah. Where we are here, I think you probably all seen the maps on the news, but like the real extent of this conflict, that it goes through almost all of the countries here in the Middle East. Iran and Lebanon are the ones certainly getting most attention. But we're hearing from our staff in Syria, they have not had any open fighting, but they see missiles being shot down in their skies, and they know those sounds very, very well. So it is difficult for them. We see in Iraq, there were regular attacks before this recent ceasefire with Iran. So just to say how Pope Francis used to talk about, that World War III is already happening. And so I think this idea that we have this major regional conflict that's going on that doesn't seem to have any real direction and doesn't seem to have any real goal, I think is a real concern for us. So that there is major regional implication here. Just to give a quick sense in terms of looking at the map here in Lebanon, this southern part, about 1/10 of the country from south of the Litani River, is the area that Israel has, first of all, did a blanket evacuation order. That was different than the 2024 war, where they would ask for an evacuation of a particular building or a neighborhood. In the 2026 war, they started giving blanket evacuation orders for entire regions. So the initial ones were south of the Litani River in the very far south here. And then in the southern parts of Beirut being here in the middle of the country, the southern neighborhoods of Beirut. They were blanket evacuation orders, and that's why we saw in the first nights of the war, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on the streets coming north into Beirut, where most of them were coming for shelter, or in the areas in the north, in the mountains here. Just to give a sense of our sort of as JRS and in terms of our geography, where we are and what's the situation in those different places. We have here the three major areas where we are working. I think it's important to highlight that the distinct reality in the different places. So the first column there, Baalbek, is a heavily Shia area. Hezbollah has been operative there for a long time. We see that 25% of the participants in our programs have already been displaced. So, and I would assume that number has grown. These numbers were taken early on in the war, that they have been displaced already. only 3.2% of them still have an income. Now, most times we're looking at an unemployment rate of well over 60 or 70%. So already the unemployment rate's high, but only 3% of them are still making any kind of income at all. And 51% expect to move in the near future. Now, contrast that with Borj Hamoud, which is a neighborhood here in Beirut, a very, very poor neighborhood, and not predominantly Shia, not predominantly Hezbollah, mostly Christian and Sunni Muslim. The numbers of displaced are much lower. Only about 10.5% of them have been displaced. A little bit more of them have an income coming in, about 12 or 13%. And 40% or so are thinking that they may have to move. A significant number of those would be Syrians. We have not seen a huge wave of Syrians going back, even though this is the second war that they've lived through. That number has not increased. There have been some movements, but nothing, no tidal wave of returns. And I think that's important to say. And then the final area, now, Barelius, this final column, is not that far from Baalbek, the first column. Baalbek is very, very Shia and has a high Hezbollah presence. Barelius is traditionally very Sunni Muslim, and there's very little Hezbollah presence there. They're not far from one another, but the two areas are very different. Now, while 25% or more of Baalbek has been displaced, only 1.6% of Barelius has been displaced. About 20% of them still have some sort of income, and only about 30% of them are thinking about moving in the future. Just to highlight, even in a small country, the areas of attack are very, very focused. So while our neighborhood is on a line between a Christian and a Shia neighborhood, which is why we get some regular attacks here, if we were to go in that direction, another 200 yards or so, cafes are open, the restaurants are going, the bars are open. It's not life as normal, but you could go and get a beer sitting on an outdoor cafe and think you're, this is the Beirut of old. Just to highlight how local some of these attacks are. Our emergency response here, we are doing and continue to do, we've had over 2,000 families served by distribution of food baskets and hygiene kits in the areas where we work, in Borj Hamoud and Barelius and Baalbek. The vast majority of those are Lebanese who've been displaced, and we're doing distributions in the public shelters. So these are public schools that have been transformed into public shelters. Public shelters only allow Lebanese. They do not allow Syrians, they do not allow Palestinians, and they do not allow the migrant workers, who we'll talk about in a second, who are here and their shelter here. So those food distributions we're doing there. We're also doing visits in the shelters, and we're starting activities for children, PSS activities and things. We also did open an emergency shelter here. This was opened first in 2024 during that war, and then it closed, and then we opened it again during this war. We have now over 200 individuals here. These are people who are migrant workers who have been in Lebanon, many of them for many years. Some of them came from Sudan, Darfur, during the Darfur wars, during the South Sudan Independence War. They came here in search of work to move away from war. So they were displaced coming here. They were displaced during the 2024 war and again displaced here during the 2026 war. So we're talking about areas, first of all, urban refugees or urban displacement. We're also talking about multiple displacements. The people who have already been displaced are themselves the ones who are most at risk. And so our shelter here is Sudanese, South Sudanese, Sri Lankan, Sierra Leonean, Bangladeshi. It's a whole mix. And it was beautiful, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, across the board. The war started during Ramadan, and so our meals were pegged to Ramadan hours during the night. And the Hindu and Buddhist and Christian residents were happy to wake up, and we had meals on the schedule, and we follow with a vast majority of our residents here are Muslims. So we followed that schedule, and we were all able to pray with one another. We were all able to celebrate with one another and live the hope for a greater light in that time of Ramadan. The migrant workers, I think the story for us here, this is an essential story of JRS. We are Yes, we are an international NGO. Yes, we have security protocols. Yes, we have funding structures and reporting structures. And we remain distinctly Jesuit. One of the ways that we can do that in a very real way is that we're built on the footprint of the Jesuits who've been here for over 400 years. This particular church for the last 50 years has welcomed migrant workers from the Philippines and Sierra Leone and Bangladesh and Sudan. We welcome them certainly as for the Christians to come here for Mass, for an English language Mass. We also in the same building have the only Buddhist temple in all of Lebanon that was created when Sri Lankan Christians asked if their Buddhist friends could have a place to pray. And so on the first night of the war in 2024, we had a bunch of our parishioners show up with a lot of their friends. What we realized, and that every night after that, 150 more people would show up. What we realized is that there was a general understanding around Lebanon as a whole, even if people had never come here before, even if if they weren't Christian, everyone, all of the migrant worker, all of these minority refugee populations, they all knew that when things got bad, you went to this church, whatever that meant. And so it was this beautiful moment. It was overwhelming. The first night I remember in 2024, again, we had that first night was about 100 people show up, and then it was more after that. But the first night, we were just trying to figure out getting sleeping arrangements for everyone, and I was trying to find bed mats and whatever, just basic stuff. And it got to 10 o'clock at night, and I thought, we've got 100 people in the building and we haven't fed them. And I turned around, and two of the Filipina amazing saintly women in our parish, I turned around and there they were, and they said, "Oh, Father, we've already cooked, rice and lentils for 150 people, and so don't worry about that." And so, like, whenever I have to preach on the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, I will think of Marlene and Lauren and the extraordinary work that they did. But that's so JRS does the work of running a shelter and making sure that we have safeguarding protocols in place, and we have the funding that runs a shelter for 200 people and has a staff that's associated with it. But all that is built, and that's a particular emergency window. And so JRS is here to fill that window in a particular window of time. But it's built on the presence of the Jesuits here, and it's built on the relationships, that human relationship. That there is a sense that this is the place where you go when things go bad, that there is that safety there. There's something about the people who are there, the space that it is, that this is a safe place that welcomes. And I think we have to make sure that we can, that for JRS, that's an essential part of us. It's certainly a major part of us in Syria and here in Lebanon. We are building on the footsteps on the footprint of giants, but also of generations. So I think incredibly important for us to highlight that. Our work, as you see on the right-hand column there, continues to be in the areas of protection with social workers, managing ongoing cases. We've been doing everything remote since the war began, except for the cases that we're handling here in the shelter. Education was suspended by the ministry for all of us in all of Lebanon, but then it was able to resume online. We all are not, we know the limitations to online learning for children, especially the elementary school children that we have. But the teachers are doing the best they can, and so we're doing lessons online. And we are, with our security consultant now, assessing the different locations where we're operating to see if we can safely welcome children back in, especially to our centers. So that is one of these things where we need a professional. I am not a professional in security. I can't assess whether there's a high risk or a low risk in a particular area. And so we're calling in the professionals to help us make that decision and to assess daily whether we can open for in-person classes. The same is true of the community centers, the livelihoods programming and the PSS, the psychosocial support that we offer in our community centers there. This is a photo from the shelter here, and I think it's this is I do want to highlight these are this particular picture is a group of Sudanese. These are people that have had to pick up their entire lives and move multiple times, and I think globally that 120 million people that we talk about, this is not people who just have to move to the next town over. The multiple movements regular movements that people are being forced into does need to be addressed. We need to, as a society, look at that. The story, multiple stories of the situation for many of them. One of the Sudanese women, not in this picture, tells the story that she, as the war was escalating, she lives in the south, so she walked probably about 40 kilometers from around Nabatea up to here. As the attacks were starting and she heard a lot of the explosions around her in the south, she got a phone call from her employer, and the employer said, "Oh, we took the morning flight to Paris. Could you take care of the house and we'll come back when the war is finished?" Well, she, a very smart, strong individual, said, "Screw this," and got out of the house and didn't have a way to get to Beirut other than walk. So she walked the 40 kilometers. Lots and lots of stories like that. People who were abandoned by their employers and who came here for shelter and safety. So we've been able to house 200 here, and then we're working with a network of locally run, migrant-run organizations to find places for other people so that they're safe. We have lots of apartments that we've started renting in the area in order to maintain, not in this area, but in a much cheaper area that is safe to make sure that others get in there. This is one of the programs for children. So there are activities for the children here in the shelter during the day. You can see in the back, it is raining these days. We are still in the springtime, and so we at night there are still people that we see, Lebanese, who are out in tents and not too far from here, and those are very difficult, cold, rainy nights that we get here these days. But these families, these kids, at least have a roof over their head for the time here. And this is a photo taken in one of the public schools, which has been made into a shelter for Lebanese. And we were doing a distribution in one of these shelters on a particular day. So this is a photo from what one of the Lebanese public schools looks like, and some of the Lebanese who would be around in there. Our hopes, for the future, to be scaling up the distributions in different areas around, to be able to increase the PSS caseload. We're aware of, among the displaced populations, the psychosocial needs are extraordinary and ever growing. So to care for them. And we're doing a lot of new partnerships here. We've had a lot of really good press because of the shelter. It is, I hate saying this, but it's sort of a niche thing. And so we're getting a lot of good attention around that. And I think we're actually able to raise some good advocacy points around the rights of domestic workers, the rights of migrants, the rights under the kafala system here. And so a lot of good partnerships there. And so we're looking at the long-term future there. And I think in the end here, we will continue to need to be flexible on our programs. On one level, we have professionals who work on program development, and we have to shift and modify. Second, we're looking at lots of ways. A lot of our social workers are sort of also helping out, sort of in staff care and small group sharings among our own staff. And so how do we manage that? But even knowing that the social workers themselves need some sort of support on top of that. So how do we sort of structure an overall care of staff? That's a major concern for us right now as we're moving into the second month of this war, the second war in the last 2 years. And then just the capacity to sustain our response financially, spiritually, physically, emotionally, just how to make sure that we can support staff through these very, very difficult times. I think that brings me to the end of my thing here. I think I'll just end with a quick story, a moment of hope for me, but I think just a realization of the importance of that sense of relationship. I'd had a rough day in the office, and I walked out probably this time of night, 7, 8 o'clock, and I was walking through the parking lot, just sort of saying hi to some of the folks who were there. And I noticed there was a kid who was being a kid. His father wanted to come over to him, and he was kind of running off and whatever. But finally, the kid ran over, and the father, who I don't know him well, but he's a Sudanese guy, came here because of the Darfur War, so he's been here for a while. Works as a migrant worker. I'm sure would struggle with money. Was displaced in the 2024 war. Displaced again now. Economic crisis. Uncertain about his future. And even though his kid was being a little, whatever, he wasn't being the most responsive child ever. When the kid ran into his arms, there was a look on his face that was the most loving, overwhelming, joyful sight that I'd ever seen. A father just lit up. with this radical joy. And I thought, if he can be joyful, what the hell am I worried about? His, situation in all sorts of ways is a lot more complicated than mine. And so I think, I hate saying it because it trivializes it sometimes. Um, Oftentimes, on one level, the situation of the people in this shelter is just terrible, and it's as a result of structures of sin all around, structures of the sin of war in particular at this point. But I think that sense of, okay, we're in this together. We're going to pick one another up, and we're going to be able to sort of rejoice with one another. And I think that's I don't understand it, and sometimes I don't live it, but I do see it around me. So I keep hoping for that for all of us. And I just, I'm grateful for all of you, and really hope that we can, as a group, continue to advocate, that the use of force, we know, is a just war theory. Use of force can be used in order to end what is evil. But it can never build real peace. And so how are we going to be real agents of peace, peacemakers like Pope Leo has invited us to be? So with that, thank you very much, and happy to continue with the conversation.
Thank you, Father Dan. Thank you for that remarkable presentation. As we, I would ask the audience, and many of whom the names, it's just wonderful for me to see my old friends on there. And I'm sure if Father Dan looks, he'll see his old friends as well. There's a feature on the bottom for Q&A. You can send your questions in through there. Maybe I might start, Father, which is in an era of doing more with less. Throughout the presentation, I kept coming back to how, right? How are you going to give MHPSS, and care to your own staff as well as your clients? How are you going to get the funds available when large governments are cutting their aid budgets, et cetera? How do you expand and bring in more people? It's all the how that I would love to see, and I guess it's tied to hopefulness too, right? Is the hope that we can respond as humanitarians.
Exactly. And I think that, what I would say is, I think two things. One's a very tangible, practical thing. And your point on, the reduction in foreign aid globally, not just in the US, but with the US cutting USAID and other international humanitarian funding, that alone in one day cut international humanitarian funding more than 40%, closer to 50%. And then other governments we're seeing are just getting much more restrictive about that. The beautiful thing is that what we've seen is in JRS, and I believe it's true in other faith-based organizations, that individuals are rising to the occasion on that. Now, individuals cannot make up for the billions of dollars that was part of the international aid, humanitarian aid budget. This is where practically, as JRS, I think we can manage a sort of a sweet spot in that we do work with government grants. We did have we had US funded PRM grants in Iraq, and when we lost them, that devastated us. But we were also able to make it through and manage. We weren't required to just close immediately. We had amazing supporters around the world who were able to help us at least do a healthy transition in some of our programs there. And I think that's an important sort of very practical thing that we all of us, we're going to have to learn to do more with less, but to be more deliberate about including our partners, our donors from around the world in that work, and to be very serious that we all need to be working on this together. And if the governments aren't stepping up, then we are going to need community support for that. So that's a practical one. I think your other point there, our hopeful staff, when they're hopeful, they are more efficient. We know this about just human beings. When we are in better mental health, spiritual health, we are better for ourselves, we're better for our neighbors, and we're certainly better in our jobs. And so we're trying as best we can. Again, situations we can have fun in our office, But then as soon as I have an individual conversation with any one of our staff, it's overwhelming, the things that they're all holding. And on top of just normal human stuff. So I'm really looking at, and our social workers are doing some great work there, psychologists are doing some great work, but what's the other thing? What are the other things that we can do? I have to say that, our experience in Lebanon during the last war was that the small group sharing, even if it was online, was actually a really helpful way to do that. Builds the community of our staff, but it also does sort of people just need in order to be able to do that. So we're looking at ways of, how do we help to structure that? How can we support that in different ways? I will say one quick on that. In the 2024 war, some of those groups were multi-religious, and there were very different political understandings before. And so it actually also helped in terms of our reconciliation work, just in terms of our own staff to better understand one another in times of crisis, rather than allowing crisis to divide us, using the opportunity for that crisis to be a place where we can support one another. So we're trying some different things here. We're kind of trying what we can and seeing what works.
Thanks, Father. I have a couple of questions from the audience. The first is, are you able to coordinate, or are you already coordinating with other organizations such as the IFRC or the Red Crescent, et cetera? That would be the first question. And then I have another one after that.
Okay, very closely, day in and day out. Médecins Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders was here doing a medical checkup. Red Cross, Lebanese Red Cross was doing pediatric checkups for us here in the shelter. IOM was here. We've had local and international organizations coming through all the time. Some of the CLC, CVX in French here, have been coming in with youth groups to do I think the education activity you saw of kids there. A lot of those, we have dance parties out in the parking lot on Saturday afternoons, and it's hysterical to watch all the kids do. So we have lots of organizations, local and international groups that are coming through. Very supportive here, and we're working in close collaboration in the public shelters, which is a much bigger operation. We're working in close collaboration with the Ministry of Social Affairs. World Food Program is coordinating all those, and lots of NGOs are working in the different shelters there. We're just one of them.
Great. I have another from regarding, again, about funding pressures, is how that, it all comes back to budgetary. But and then a follow-up from another person, which is, how can we help? How can we help you remotely, if that's possible? I mean, other than simply give, is there ways that we can help you accompany and advocate?
Right. To the first question, I think I had an answer there, and now I'm totally blanking on the first question. I can go to the second question now.
The first question really was a longer reflection from one of the from Hawa Bako, who worked for JRS in Nigeria, but it sort of covers the same ground of how JRS navigates funding pressures while sustaining the long-term accompaniment, right? So how do you do more with less, and that sort of long-term and short-term, plan.
Exactly. So I think on the funding, I think I'll give credit here to Bridget and the team at JRS USA. I think our structures globally, what we see at JRS USA, what we see in the Xavier Network, so these are the mission offices globally, is that because of the work of Jesuits around the world for centuries, we have relationships in places where there are funds available. And so in moments of emergency, that funding structure can become active. Now, I'll say this. I talk regularly with my regional directors, other regional directors of JRS. The Middle East, forgive the term, but it's sexy. It makes the front page of the newspaper. And the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and gas prices have gone up means that everyone's paying attention to what's going on here. And if Israel is involved, American media is involved, is attentive to that. Nothing implied there, but just like it's something that Americans are concerned about, as they should be. So we get a lot of attention. The situation in Myanmar doesn't make it into the newspaper. The situation, ongoing, conflict in Sudan around Khartoum, hasn't been in the newspaper for a long time. So I want to name very clearly that we are, as ridiculous and terrible, as horrific as it sounds, there's a place funding wise, there's a place of privilege for us in this region where we have been able to access more funding because people are more aware of the situation that's going on, and our Jesuit connections, JRS in the U.S. and the mission offices throughout the world. We're getting funding from Jesuit-related organizations globally, from the Philippines and from Korea and from Germany and from the U.S. And so it's a beautiful thing, and we I'm profoundly grateful for that every day. So we're in a space where we're not as bad off as other regions, I'll say that. And the amount of funding overall is going down significantly. I think this is where we're just being challenged at the moment. I'll always say, my take on what it is to be a Jesuit organization is that we start with reality. We strip away any of the conspiracy theories or the nonsense or the fears or jealousies or the prejudices that we have. We start with what is real, and we respond with love. The reality right now is that the international funding structure has fallen apart. How do we still respond with love? How do we sort of inspire that in others around us? How do we we do have to do more with less, and that's again the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Like this is not impossible. We are able to do this as human beings and expand. So I think that's a big part. And what I would say is, how do we all get involved in that? I'm not going to turn down money, and we are in desperate need of that. And we're looking at expansion and long-term response and recovery programs as we're planning very carefully here for what's going to happen in Lebanon. In the whole region, this is going to have a huge impact in what's going to happen in the future of Iraq, the future of Syria, even the future of Jordan. But what I would say the most important thing, and what I have just been so overwhelmingly happy with Pope Leo's response in the last few weeks is, we all have a responsibility, and those of us who are in places where we can actually speak to our government and have our voices heard ought to make sure that civil society is working and that we're doing our job and we're advocating that there, as Catholics, we can say that, in very, very constrained ways, there is sometimes a way in which the use of force could limit evil. But the use of force will never bring about the good. And the good, the construction of the good is something that takes adults in a room talking for a long time over complex issues that have to understand one another. It's long and sometimes dirty, but it's the only way to real peace. So how do we do that work of humanly dialogue and politically diplomacy? That's I think how do we advocate for more of that?
Well, thanks, Father. Maybe the last question, it would be really about self-care, especially mental health, psychosocial care for you and your staff. In order to go on doing this work. I mean, the pressure on you is high. How is that being done? And I know that that's an area where you and I have worked together, on mental health programs.
Mhm.
But again, how can we help?
Right. How to help? I mean, I think this is where we have built in sort of support structures in the teams themselves, and so just in terms of just I think we have a light enough managerial structure that on one level is enough to work, and light enough that that when the direct supervisor checks in with someone, it doesn't feel as though their boss is checking in, that there is still enough of a I think I may be Pollyannish about it, but I think as I check in with the directors of the programs here that that I use the model as a Jesuit. On one level, there's a cura apostolica. I have to take care of the work, but my first job is cura personalis. How am I taking care of the person? And so the beginning of all of our one-on-one meetings, but even in terms of our group meetings, conferences and things, planning meetings, we do a quick check-in. It's like how you are coming into this meeting is important, especially now. And so we take the pulse of our staff here every few days. So I think that just to this is a management structure. I think it's an essential part of who we are as a Jesuit organization, that we have to be able to navigate that. We made it very clear in terms of HR policies at the beginning that remote work, days off, we weren't going to, people are going to be a lot of flexibility in that. We were able to we provided housing for people who had been displaced as they were sort of moving from one place to the next. How do we make sure that, and this here again, we're using the Jesuit structures. We housed people of all religions in the Jesuit residence for last war, for the full war. And this time it was only for short periods as they were looking for other things. So how do we, without having to, I know a lot of the big international NGOs, rent, super expensive apartments and, here in Ashrafia, thousands of dollars a month. We can't do that. But we do have a Jesuit residence and we have guest rooms. And so it's not as posh or chic, but if you're willing to live with us, you and your family are welcome to join us there. And so looking after the very, very real care of our staff who had been displaced. So like, what are the things that we can do? Simple, basic, but how do we cover those human needs?
Great. Well, I think I'll leave it there. Father, I would remind everyone that Father Dan Corrou will be at St. Ignatius in New York for those of us on the call who are more local. That will be on Sunday, April 26th. At 1 p.m. And that's the short film called A Journey of Hope. I want to thank Father Dan. I want to thank JRS for this really remarkable discussion and presentation on what's going on, as Father Dan said, in an area that we hear more about, but one that is filled with suffering. So thank you, Father Dan, for all you do.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you for everyone.
And everyone else, we have a webinar next week on the 22nd, also in the chat. And we look forward to seeing more JRS speakers, and we look forward to continuing these conversations. Thanks so much. Be well, be safe.
Thank you. Bye.